And Ed has been a Toastmaster since 1995, and in 2011 achieved Distinguished Toastmaster, which is the highest Toastmaster award. He has learned leadership by filling at the club level executive roles, and now he is vice president of the Pembroke and area Toastmaster. Note that TI indicates he joined in 2005, yet his first Competent Communicator Educational Manual Award was completed in 1997. Welcome, Ed, and we are excited to listen to your speech.
Each title is?
But me?
You're supposed to announce my speech title.
Oh.
Yeah,
it's called the Discrepancy.
Oh, the Discrepancy, right? Yeah, sorry.
I have a discrepancy in the amount of time, or the start date, I should say, for my journey with Toastmasters. How did that happen? Well, it happened because I had a fantastic opportunity that took me away from Toastmasters for a bit. Fellow Toastmaster, Madam Toastmaster, and most welcome guests out in video land, or hopefully you will see this video. This story goes back quite a few years. Back in 2003, I was working on a very exciting project at that time called Nuclear Safeguards. Nuclear Safeguards. This is a very important project because there is a big problem in the world. We want to have cheap nuclear power, but we don't want to have nuclear explosions happening, because that would be bad. So we have this company, this international agency called the International Atomic Energy Agency. Their task is to make sure that none of the spent fuel that comes out of reactors gets into the wrong hands. Now, how do they do that? Well, basically, they send some inspectors to all of the nuclear stations and make sure that when they're all locked up tight, like when they're operating normally, they're locked up tight with seals on them and everything like that, so that no fuel is coming in and out of them. And the only time when fuel does come out of them is when those reactors are being refueled. So they shut the reactors down, and they open up all the locks and tags and security seals. And then while the inspectors are watching, the fuel comes out and it goes into a certain secure location where nobody can touch it. That's the normal way they look after safety of nuclear materials. However, in Canada, we have a different style reactor that does not need to be shut down to refuel it, which is a very positive thing, because normally a normal reactor has to be shut down for many months, every couple of years or so, for this refueling to go on. So the stations does not produce power, and some countries, they don't have very many of these, so that's a severe problem being shut down. So the CANDU reactor's got a solution for you. You don't have to shut the power down. The power stays on while the fuel is going in and out all the time. Oops, this sounds like a scary thing for nuclear safeguards. How do we ensure that none of those bundles coming out are going in the wrong hands? You see, the inspectors can't go in there and watch the fuel going in and out because the reactor's turned on, and the nuclear radiation fields are so high, you'd die if you went near that. So in order to be compliant with nuclear safeguards, the Canadian designers came up with a solution. They had some very radiation resistant computers, basically sensors built into their CANDU style reactor fuel handling systems to make sure that every time a bundle came out, it was counted. The spent fuel bundle counter was created specifically to count the fuel as it came out of the reactors, so they give a tally to the inspectors, so that on a regular basis they could come in and make sure that all the bundles that were counted and tallied up were accounted for in the spent fuel bays. So that's how the solution was made for how you can send CANDU reactors, not only in Canada, but throughout the world, without worrying about proliferation of this nuclear material that people could make bombs out of. So the people in my company actually created that, and they installed, they constructed, designed, built, installed in one reactor in Canada. My role, once I joined the project, was to duplicate that and put it in all of the other CANDU stations in Canada, as well as create systems that the inspectors, the International Atomic Energy Inspectors, could put into all of the other offshore reactors. Around this time, that gave me the opportunity to visit all the nuclear stations in Canada and to network. You know, a thing in Toastmasters we say you should do, network with all the important people in those stations, such that later on, when I was between projects, I could find something to do. Anyway, that safeguards work went on for many years. And then we had all the existing CANDU reactors safeguarded with our spent fuel bundle counter. And since we weren't making any new reactors, not at that time anyway, my role finished. Well, my company kept me employed, of course, being the nice people they are, and they found some work for me, but it wasn't terribly exciting work. So I kept my eyes, my ears, and my contacts I created through people I met in various different ways. And being a budding Toastmaster at that time, I got to know how to do this networking stuff. So it was very useful for me. It enabled me to make these contacts. It became useful when I found about this thing called the Pickering A return to service. Now, what was that? Well, back up a little bit. There was a certain anti-nuclear government in Ontario at one time who decided that, well, we got surplus power in Ontario, and those reactors didn't quite perfectly meet every expectation absolutely perfectly in the last test, in the last inspection. So let's shut them down. We don't need them. We got a surplus power anyway. Big deal. Yeah, right. So they were shut down. The Pickering A units, 1, 2, 3, and 4 were shut down. And then a following government decided, let's shut down those coal-fired plants. They're dirty things. Now, why the previous government didn't shut down the coal-fired plants instead of the nuclear ones, that's another story. Anyway, we're back to the current ones. They want to turn these reactors back up. Trouble with that, of course, did I mention earlier that those nuclear stations were actually designed and built and constructed before the nuclear regulations were written up and made into law? Now, the stations were allowed to continue running under what we call a grandfather clause. That's okay. The intent of those rules were met, so that was good enough. But if you shut the reactors down, there goes the grandfather clause. You want to bring it back up, you got to meet the letter of the law, the letter of the regulations. So that's where the opportunity came in for me to help out. As I mentioned in my previous job, I was very familiar with the CANDU fuel handling system, which is one of the major safety involved systems, safety important systems in a CANDU reactor. Thus, I had the experience, I had the knowledge to really help with the reactor in going through these safety critical components and identifying whether or not they met the requirements. I was able to identify which components were safety, which ones met the requirements, and which ones needed a tweak or maybe some other work to get them to meet the modern regulation of the requirements in the nuclear safeguards regulations. That was a fun project. Did that for a year and a half. Mind you, I was well away from my home at that point. I couldn't go to my home club for Toastmasters, so things fell by the way. And of course, being there, doing all sorts of extra work, connectivity, overtime, etc. Toastmasters sort of wasn't on my mind at that time. But when that work was completed, I went back to Chalk River, my home place, and that was late 2004. And Shortly afterwards, when I got back and got settled in again, I rejoined Toastmasters. So that's why my official record, as you look at it now, says 2005 rather than 1995. 10 years discrepancy. But that's not a big deal. I enjoyed Toastmasters. It works well for me. The difference doesn't matter, but I thought I should explain why. There's a discrepancy in when I started Toastmasters and when the official record shows I started. Madam Toastmaster.
Thank you, Ed. And now I understand why we have this